Once you have a data sheet added, you can use it to drive your script. So let's go over to our script section where we have some scripts defined and look at our example 1. This is a script that uses the WYSI CRM, which is our sample .NET application, and we're just logging in, adding a contact, and verifying that it gets added, and then exiting the application. Each time I run this, it will enter a unique value because what I've done is created a variable and used the time function, which will always generate a unique number, to create my contact name, and that's the name that gets created each time. The thing is, this data isn't very realistic. I may want to run this using data that I already have, and I can do that by creating a data-driven script. And there's a couple of ways to do that again in QA Wizard Pro. The very quickest and easiest way to do it is using the data source dropdown. Each time you create and add a data sheet to your workspace, no matter whether it's local or external, you'll see it listed here. So you can select the data sheet you want to work with. I'm going to work with our Excel spreadsheet one, the external contacts. Right now, by selecting that, I've automatically created a looping script. And what that means is just a simple act of connecting here will cause this script to loop once for each row of data I have in my data source. And let me open this up here so we can see that. What I'd like to do if I'm looking at the data and working with a script is to right-click up here and choose a new tab group so I can see my data as well as my script. So what I want to do is use this to drive my script. Right now, if I ran it, it would loop 6 times because I have 6 rows of data. And that's good, but what I really want to do is have this data be entered into my application. If I come back here and edit this statement again, we'll see that I now have datasheet active here. And I can select that. And what's nice here is that I can select the column that I want to use. So I'm going to select first and click OK. And right now, you'll see that instead of having a hard-coded value, it's saying, get me whatever's in this cell under the first column header. And QA Wizard Pro itself will move the record pointer for you. You won't have to worry about that. It will come down here and run once with Joe and then Homer and then Les and so forth. Now this is great. It's getting us the first name. But in this case, what we probably want to do is also enter the last name. Well, now that I see my syntax here, I'm just going to do copy and paste. I'm going to make sure to insert a space in there so I don't get my first name and last name jammed up against one another. And then paste that out. And all I need to reference is the column header name. So I'll put last in here. And now what will happen is whatever my first and last name are for that particular row will be assigned to my variable. And what's nice about this is that variable is being used in several different places. It's also being used in the checkpoint. So I only have to make that change here. Now I also probably want to do my email. And in this case, before I was making up a bogus email for my user, I want to use the actual email that's down here. So again, I can either edit this statement and select from the data sheet and just select the email column and click OK. And it's going to replace that with my email cell. So that's using the data source dropdown. We'll always go through the entire script, so you need to make sure that when you end at the bottom, you'll be ready to start again at the top. Another limitation to this is that it's going to use whatever data sheet you have specified up here. You cannot connect to multiple data sheets. If I come up here and select this one now, I've lost my connection to the external contacts one, and I'll get different results here. If you do want to connect to multiple data sources, you would want to use datasheet access commands, and we're going to take a look at those now. Here's the same script that's already been modified. We saw how it worked and it logged me in each time, but that's a little extra work. It's not necessary. What we want to do is pare this down so it only loops through what it needs to loop through. And we can narrow that down. I've got these divided into steps. What we actually want to repeat are steps 2 and 3. We want to add a contact and then verify that it's there. We don't want to exit the app until we're done. We only want to log in once. So let's separate those out, and we'll put a loop in to cover that. To use the dataset access commands, and sometimes they're called record set access, they're sort of interchangeable, you do not want to use the data source dropdown. If you set up your script originally using the data source dropdown, make sure you set this back to none. Otherwise, it will loop through once for each row of data that you have and be very confusing. So the first thing we need to do is let me open our external contacts again and use that. Look at our data. We want to open and point to our first record here. Using the data source dropdown does that for us automatically. Here, though, we'll have to open the record set. And the way you do that is you create a variable, and I tend to use all caps just to make them stand out for a naming convention, and use the open record set function to open the actual data sheet. What you will specify here is the name as it's defined in the workspace. And anytime you run this command, it will come down here and move the record pointer to your first record. So that's great. That's done for us. The next thing we need to do is to advance the record pointer. When you use the data source dropdown, all that's done for you automatically. When you use datasheet access commands, you need to control the record pointer yourself. So what we're going to do is come down here. Each time we add a contact and verify it, we're then going to move to the next row. And conveniently enough, there's a next row function. What the next row function takes is the name of the record set. Once you've created and opened your record set, you can reference it using that variable name. So I'll come down here and just use file. And that will bump us up. Now we need to add our loop. Usually for these I tend to use while loops because conveniently enough there's a way to determine when you hit the end of file, and that is another record set or datasheet access function called end of file. As you move through your record set and you're moving the pointer, at some point you'll get to the last record. You'll attempt to move to the next record, it won't be there, and you will trigger an end of file condition. And that's what we're going to check for here. And the way we do that is using record set end of file, EOF, file. And we're checking, we want to run this while this is false. Once it becomes true, once we hit the end of the file, we want to drop out of our loop. So that's a quick and easy way to set up your loop. You will need to have the corresponding WN statement, and we'll put that right here after our next row. One thing you can do to make your loops stand out a little bit more is to indent them. So what I'm going to do is come in here and highlight these and just hit the tab, which will space in, and you can see easily what's contained in that loop. So we have our basic framework set up now. We're only going to log in once, but we're going to loop through each record that we have here. The final thing we need to do is to make sure we're reading in the information correctly from each row. Now, when you are using data source dropdown, you use cell and then your column header name. That is possible because you can only have one datasheet that you're interacting with. So you don't have to explicitly say what datasheet you're working with. It knows from the data source dropdown. If you're using datasheet access commands, you will need to specify the record set that you're working with, because it's possible that you may have multiple ones of these open, and they may have, some of them may have the same column header. So you need to specify explicitly what datasheet you want the information to come from. And for that, we use the get row value function. I'm going to come in here and just replace this. Get row value. We already have our column name. We know that's the same. What we need to also specify is the record set. And you can use the tooltips to get an idea of what's required here. As you recall, anytime we reference the record set, we use the variable we set up for it. So it's get row value, file, and then the column header. And that will return, wherever we are, the current value of that cell. And now that I have that information, I'm going to use the copy and paste again and paste it over here. And that should get me my last name. So that is record set access commands. You can use it to connect to as many data sheets as you need.